Hello everybody and welcome to another Top 5 board gaming video. Today I'm going to be talking about what I feel are the 5 most important core concepts of board game design. But before I get started, if you haven't done so already, please take a look at all my various social media pages as well as my Patreon. On all of those you'll be able to interact with myself and my channel in a bunch of really fun and interesting ways. So this is a video that I sort of did actually several years ago now, but somebody relatively recently pointed out that what I was talking about was board game mechanics, not the core principles of board game design, which is what I originally intended. So I figured, let's do a revamp. Let's redo this, and this time we're actually going to get into the core principles of how games are designed and manufactured, and what I personally feel are the most important aspects to make me really interested in playing the game and make the game a lot more smooth for not only me, but my fellow players as well. Now, obviously, this is a huge category, and you guys know that I love hearing from you. So please let me know, what are your favorite or most important core game concepts and core principles that you like to see in a board game before you even sit down to play it. Let me know anything and everything in the comments below. But with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with my number 5. At number 5, I've got game flow, and as an example, I took Rising Sun here. So what do I mean by game flow? I mean just the general idea of you go from phase to phase to phase, round to round to round, etc., all of those kinds of things. And I want a game that does that in a smooth way, and it doesn't feel bogged down, especially in the context of like analysis paralysis and things like that, which is something that we see all the time with this kind of thing, where you have jarring instances of changing from one phase to another. Rising Sun is a good example of a game that does it at least relatively smoothly. So you have the different political mandate phases, the commie phase, and then you've got the war phase. The war phase can take a little bit of time. It has some AP, but it's not too bad. And then, of course, at the very beginning of all that, you have the tea ceremony. So you have a game that it does have these distinct pieces, but it's really nice in that they fit together very well. Another good example of this is Biblios, very small game, but you do have the idea of the card drafting phase, or the initial sort of draft phase, and then after that you have the auction phase. And again, they feel different, they feel distinctly separate from one another, but at the same time you realize very quickly how integrated they are and how important each one is to an overall strategy. So that's sort of what I mean by game flow, and overall just not making the experience feel like you sort of have to like stand up and move to a different room in order to keep the game going, and just sort of having that mentality, but it just feels like it's one piece and it's consistent and it just works out really well. But with that, the overall game flow, my number 5. And number 4, I've got rules, and as an example, we have the infamous Robinson Crusoe, first edition. So rules are really important for any game, and the thing is, this is low on the list because it has nothing to really do with the game design. And with game flow, for example, I can sort of forgive it, at least to an extent, because if the game is really good otherwise, then I'm like, okay, I can deal with a little bit of AP, and that's why Rising Sun is a good example. That said, having poorly written rules makes for a horrible game experience because you don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to do things properly. You don't know like where you need to go, how it needs to happen, how you need to get there, any of that kind of stuff. And it can be amazingly frustrating, especially the first time you play through a game. So that's why the first edition of Robinson Crusoe is a great example of this, because this is very famously horribly written rules. They're very difficult to decipher. It's extremely tough to really get into the game. But thankfully the second edition did a good job of making the rules more concise and understandable. But at the same time, while again it's not explicitly about the game design or the core principles of the game, it is a very important feature of the game because it tells you how to actually play it. And you could end up playing it completely wrong and then you don't enjoy it, but you were playing it wrong. So maybe that's why you didn't enjoy it. But overall, having well-written, clear and concise rules is my number 4. And number 3, I've got something that I've talked about on my channel several times, and that is component quality. I use Power Grid as an example because the money in the Power Grid base game is absolutely horrible. I cannot stand it. And one of the things that I really don't like about games that have poor component quality is I feel like I don't get a lot of replayability out of them. And it's really, really frustrating because I want to make sure that I'm able to go in and handle the money and handle the cards and do what I need to do as a player to play the game. The problem is that if I play a game like this and I just use the included paper money, it's absolutely horrible. And I feel like it's going to tear every single time I hand it off to somebody. So it gets really frustrating. And honestly, it just gets in the way of my fun of the game. This has happened on several other games too. One that I mentioned specifically was the Castles of Mad King Ludwig. The cardboard pieces in that you use to put together the individual castle rooms and stuff, it's so thin. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's really difficult and very frustrating to handle because I never know if the thing is just going to tear by me like slightly bending my fingers, or even if you bend the cardboard, are you ever going to make it true again? So things like that can be really annoying, and that's why it's a little bit higher on this list, because it's very specifically a manufacturing thing. And you can still have a good quality gameplay experience if you have relatively bad components, but at the same time, it's something that really matters. It's something that is very important for playing the game and being in the game. So with that component quality, my number 3. And number 2, I've got integration of theme. And as an example, I've got Cytosis. This is a worker placement game that takes place inside of an animal cell. And essentially, it does a really good job of taking something that is incredibly scientifically complicated and putting it into a game in a way where it's not overbearing. And that's really the key element for this. I've talked about this, and I did a specific video about theme and drowning in theme before, where I talked about scientific games specifically, because it's really easy to go overboard on theme. At the same time, it's also easy to swing the other way, where it just feels like a theme is kind of pasted on. So a good example of that is like we had Mage Knight, and then we had the Star Trek Frontiers, I think it was, which was a Star Trek reskinning of Mage Knight. Now, that's not inherently bad, but at the same time, it's like, you're just reskinning it. I mean, you can use Monopoly as an example, or Catan, or any of these things, where it doesn't necessarily feel out of place in a particular theme, but at the same time, you're like, I know this was designed for something else, and so it's just kind of hitting me wrong. So for me, having a well-integrated but not overbearing theme can make a good game feel great, and having a poorly done or just slapped on theme or a really overbearing theme can make a game that has otherwise really good and well done mechanics seem absolutely terrible, because I can't focus on the actual game itself. A good example of that is a Kickstarter that I backed not too long ago, which was BIOS Genesis. That's an example of a science game where they got the science very, very correct. They did a wonderful job with the beginning of the universe, but the theme is so overbearing. It meant that I could barely look at the game mechanics, and it was just really, really frustrating. I'm a person where when I'm gaming, I love to see theme. I love to see it on the board, in the cards and the components all over the place, and if I can see it, I'm like, oh, that's really cool. It makes the game come alive for me, and I know that some people don't particularly care, but for me it's really important, so that's why theme is my number 2. At number 1, I've got replayability, and as an example, my favorite game of all time, Cosmic Encounter. So replayability is, I mean, it's the most important aspect for me, and the fact is that this is a culmination of pretty much everything I've talked about and more. So if we think about replayability, I think about a game that I enjoyed the first time, I enjoyed the second time, and I still enjoy it. I still want to play it. I want to go back and back and back. So that means that I enjoyed the theme, or there was no theme. So for example, abstract games like Onitama or something along those lines, where there's not really a theme, but it's very pure strategy. It's a game that is well balanced and a lot of fun. It's a game that has a lot of options for people to play as. So that's why I picked Cosmic Encounter, because you have all of these different alien powers that can vastly change not only how you personally are playing, but how you're interacting with the other players table. There's a lot of different aspects going on with this. And so replayability for me is really important, because the fact is I can't afford to buy every single game that I want to play, and I need to stick to at least mostly the games that I have. Now granted, I do have quite a few games in my collection, but at the same time I'm not buying a whole lot of new ones, because I made sure that I got games that I enjoy playing not once, not twice, but many times. So for some people, they really enjoy deck builders. For others, they really enjoy worker placements. For others, like me, I really enjoy negotiation games and science-themed games in general. So it just really depends on you as a person, but for me personally, having something be replayable means that it took all of these different aspects in culmination and just made an overall experience that I simply want to go through and do again and again and again. And that's really why maybe it's kind of a cheat for this particular video, because it's not something specific that makes a game replayable. But I guess if you want to put tags on it, you could say something along the lines of asymmetry in a game. And like I said, with Cosmic Encounter having different alien powers. Same thing for something like Vast, Crystal Caverns, where you've got all of the different characters you can play as. You can have games that are very narrative, where you've got like Zombicide or Mice and Mystics, where you're going through a campaign. Descent is another good example. Same thing with like Pandemic Legacy or Risk Legacy, and you have a story that you're following. There's all sorts of different ways that you can get replayability out of a game. But for me, I'm a big fan of narrative storytelling, as well as games like this that do a good job of integrating theme, good game balance, and then asymmetry of either your starting conditions or that can change the game later on, so it just doesn't feel like the same experience every single time. So overall replayability and the culmination of all of these different things together is my #1 game design principle. Well folks, that's going to be it for me. I hope that you enjoyed this video of my 5 actual favorite core principles in game design, or core principles of games in general. And again, I know I may have cheated just a little bit on that last one, because again, the fact is that it boils down to a culmination of everything, and I don't want to have games that I just play once and I'm just kind of like, eh. And I know a lot of people are the same way as that, and a lot of people would agree with me in that. And there might be some little aspect of a game that really annoys me, and I don't want to deal with it. So maybe I can replace the components, or maybe I can rewrite the rules and reread them and make my own little cheat sheets or something like that. There's a lot of ways to get around some of this stuff for a game that I like enough. But with that, thank you guys very much for watching. As always, please let me know what you all think in the comments below. This one is especially interesting because there's a lot of different ways that you can design games. There's a lot of different ways that you can do it. There's a lot of different ways that you can integrate player interaction and all of this kind of stuff. So I'm really curious what you guys have to say about it. Please let me know any and all thoughts in the comments below. Again, you guys know I love hearing from you. But with that, thank you very much again for watching, and I will see you next time.